The round table of Immortal 460s is a very select group. This is mostly because the 460 was, in relative terms, still a smaller size of engine, so where merit is concerned, 462s or anything larger are usually the talks of the town, so to speak. Yet, among Immortal 460s stands a king among the peasants. The most numerous passenger steam locomotive of all time, in fact. The locomotive which conquered Europe. The Deutsche Reichsbahn Baureihe 3810, better known to you and me as the P8. Our story begins with the Prussian State Railways Class P6, a product of a time where compound locomotives were still considered to be largely a better option than superheated examples. It was a mid-sized 260 meant for passenger duties. However, the driving wheels being just 1.6 metres in diameter and the lack of adhesion rather hampered performance. Nevertheless, between 1903 and 1910, 272 had been built. In 1906 then, an improved version of the design came about. Given an extra leading axle to divide the load better, they were to be among the fastest locomotives in Prussia. To hammer this home, the first members of the new class were built with streamlined cabs. The wheels were still not massively big, but at 1.75 metres they still gave an advantage over hilly routes. Head of the design team responsible for the new loco, Robert Garbe, seemed to have all the details worked out. The new locos were to be capable of 110 km an hour, easy to operate and maintain, and powerful. And yet, they were not very popular from the get-go. They would suffer frequent defects, their cylinders caused them to ride roughly, and their valves were simply not up to the task. Their tenders also had a tendency to shuffle, banging into the loco when running at speed, especially in reverse. The Prussian State Railways would mostly solve the above issues, minus the tender, but in doing so discovered that a two-cylinder machine with a still suboptimal weight distribution was not really capable of sustained 110 km an hour running. Because of this, the locomotive would be designated light passenger engines, and in doing so were classified P8, P for passenger. And that is what made the P8s a success. They were very good at a very specific yet very widespread type of service. What was once meant to be a rather premier class of locomotive for a select few surfaces in Prussia became the standard passenger locomotive. This was reflected in their vast numbers. London and North Eastern Railways B1 having 410 members built? Small potatoes. The London, Midland and Scottish Railways 842 Class 5s? No big deal. Try 2,350 P8s built for the Preußische Staatsbahn. And just looking at them, it's not very hard to see why they'd be successful. Schmidt superheaters, a long firebox, long travel valves, a slab-fronted, no-nonsense design, with all the gubbins nicely get-at-able, decked out in as many standardised components as possible. But their performance was the real outstanding aspect, for the 1900s anyway. Brian Hollingsworth described the class as capable of maintaining 80 km an hour with 700 tons in tow on the level. On a 1 in 100 gradient, or 10% if you prefer, they could still manage 300 tons. Their max speed officially was 100 km an hour. Now let me put that into perspective. Given the loading gauge would allow, a P8 would have been perfectly capable of running the 1900s Flying Scotsman service, which weighed only 300 tons and had a highest average speed recorded of 85 km an hour, behind number 990 over the milder gradients of the Great Northern Railway. So the Ivad Atlantics were being maxed out, whilst the P8 would still have power to spare. Might not be a straightforward comparison, but it's still noting both locos have the same 170 psi working pressure, or 12 bar. Sadly though, this is a locomotive from modern-day Germany, and that means at one point in their story, it is inevitable we have to mention reparations. 628 P8s were designated to be reassigned. Of these, 168 went to Belgium, 162 went to France, Greece and Lithuania both received 11, Italy got 25, Poland ended up with a whopping 192 after France was done with some of theirs, and finally, Romania received 18. The remaining 41 were kept in German territory governed by Allied powers between the end of the conflict in 1935, when they were returned to the now nationalised Deutsche Reichsbahn. The Reichsbahn, or DRG, had classified 460 passenger locos with the Baureihe, or build series, 38, and the P8 specifically becoming the 3810. Perhaps their more impressive feats, however, were across the rest of Europe. The Polish P8s, classified OK1 by the Polish Railways, or PKP, became very well regarded indeed. Further examples would be built to a total of 272 OK1s, and they were never replaced as Poland's primary passenger steam locomotive, although they also monopolised the French-Polish coal traffic. In Belgium, the Nationale Maatschappij der Belgische Spoorwegen, or whatever the equivalent is in French, classified the P8s as Type 64 in 1931, having simply kept their German numbering up until then. Maintained at the central workshop in Mechelen, the P8s were properly Belgianised during their working lives, some of them ditching the Knorr feed water heater for ACFI or Metcalfe equipment. In Italy, they didn't fare so well. They were found to be too heavy for many routes, as the infrastructure had not been properly modernised to accommodate something so large. You could say the P8s were the nail that broke the camel's back before the slight revolution of the Italian railways in the 1930s. That joke was terrible, and I'm sure the 4 Italians that watch this channel have already thought of far better jokes than I could make about that statement, so we'll move on. In France, the P8s became property of all the major chemins de fer. Alsace-Lorraine getting 25, 25 more to the Fer d'Ouest, de l'État got 17, and Nord bagged 75. History does not recall whether crude remarks not unlike a la merde were thrown around. Romania, meanwhile, was very impressed with the P8s as their Series 230. Much like Poland, they would endeavour to construct locomotives to similar specifications, but with Romanian fittings under licence, as well as simply buying P8s straight from the DRG. As for Greece or Lithuania, I ventured far and wide, and by that I mean the third page of Google and the 7th of Bing, and I couldn't find any sources saying how well they did or how they were distributed across those countries. Oh well, I tried. Back home in Germany, the class were affectionately known as die Mädchen für alles, the maid of all work. They had built more BR-3810s to replace the examples repaid to other countries, eventually capping the total of BR-3810s built at 3,948. The DRG examples were given extended chimneys, Wagner-style smoke deflectors, and electric lighting. As their title as Maids of All Work reveals, they had escaped the limited scope of light passenger engines. After a second global scrap, P8 spread their proverbial wings even further. 5 worked for the Nederlandse Spoorwegen after liberation, until 1947, becoming their class 3850. The numerical premier of the class, number 3851, ran roughly 50,000 kilometres under NS ownership, with 44,800 kilometres of that total being ran between December 45 and January 46. 5 went to the Soviet Union, 8 to Austria, another 400 odd went to Poland, 3 to Denmark, with the remaining 2,800 odd divided between East and West Germany. Wrecked by conflict and replacement too expensive to carry out with any sort of pace, the BR-3810 dwindled to just 78 members come 1968. The grand majority of these would work south of Stuttgart, with a sizable denomination working trains over the Schwarzwald branch lines. Their ability to work branch lines helped by the fact the locomotives with the original tenders were fitted with Wendezeugsteuerung, or push-pull gear. Rather keen to withdraw the locomotives, a premature farewell tour would see 382383 tour the Netherlands before heading back to Germany, but in the event, the final German 3810 would be withdrawn in 1975. Some of the French railways, notably the West lines, hated the P8s and withdrew them at their earliest convenience, but the final French P8 would be running on the Est lines until 1966. The same year, Belgium would withdraw their last Type 64. The PKP kept their OK1s in remarkable condition, adopting a system where every steam locomotive was steamed at regular intervals, one consecutively after the other, to keep the wear and tear of the whole steam fleet at roughly equal levels. Their final OK1 went in 1981. As stated before, I cannot find sufficient information on the withdrawal for the Greek, Lithuanian or Romanian P8s. But happily, there have been loads of P8s preserved, from ones right at home in Germany to Romanian ones in Belgium. One of the German ones, number 382267, has even held a circus train in preservation. But don't let the clowns fool you. The P8 was the king of the railway.